All right, ready to dive in. Today we're looking at The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. And this one, it's not your typical self-help book.
No.
No.
Oh,
It's more like a guide. Like a guide to just being okay with reality and just like focusing your energy on the stuff that actually matters. You know what I mean?
absolutely. And I think one of the things that's so interesting about Manson's approach is that he uses all these kind of unexpected examples to get his points across.
Mm-hmm.
Like, who would have thought we'd be learning life lessons from a guy like Charles Bukowski?
Yeah, the hard-drinking, womanizing poet.
Right, exactly.
But Manson uses him to show this idea that just being honest about your flaws, even like
Right.
celebrating them, that can actually be like the key to real connection and even success. It's so different from what we're kind of told all the time, right?
Yeah, it's like the complete opposite of fake it till you make it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That whole thing that we get bombarded with all the time,
Totally.
it's refreshing.
It's like he's giving us permission to just ditch, the pressure of having to be perfect.
Yes.
And just embrace kind of the messiness.
The messiness
of who we are.
Yeah, our imperfect selves.
Yeah.
He calls this striving for the ideal, the feedback loop from hell.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. We're scrolling through social media. We're seeing everyone's highlight reels.
Oh, yeah.
And then suddenly it's like, oh, I'm not enough.
Right.
You ever felt that?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
Especially these days. It's so easy to get caught up in comparing yourself to everyone else. And Manson's point is that, like, this constant chasing, this feeling like you always need more, it can actually trap you in this cycle of, like, never being satisfied.
Yeah, it's like we're programmed to focus on what we're missing instead of, like, enjoying what we have,
Totally.
Like, think about, our grandparents' generation. They just kind of dealt with things.
They did.
And now we're, like, analyzing every feeling. We're comparing every experience. It's like, no wonder we're all stressed out.
I know, right.
So it's not that we should just, like, stop caring about everything.
Well,
right?
no, definitely not.
Manson's point is more about being, choosy. About where our energy goes, about what we actually give our attention to. It's about choosing what really matters and just letting go of the rest.
Yeah.
That's the subtle art, right?
The subtle art.
So how do we actually choose what to give a fuck about?
Well, he kind of breaks it down into three subtleties.
Mm.
The first one is that it's not about just being indifferent, right?
Okay.
It's about being okay with being different.
Mm.
Not conforming to these kind of societal expectations that don't really fit for you.
So instead of, like, stressing about having the perfect Instagram, you focus on something you're actually passionate about in real life.
Yeah, exactly. It's about aligning your actions with what you actually care about, even if that goes against the grain. The second subtlety is that it requires kind of giving a fuck about something that's bigger than the adversity you're facing. And he uses this hilarious example of this little lady arguing with a cashier over a, like, 30-cent coupon.
Oh, I remember that one. That's great. Like, the world's falling apart. And she's worried about 30 cents.
Exactly. It's so funny. But it really highlights how we get caught up in these small things and miss the bigger picture.
Yeah, the first world problems, right.
Totally.
Okay, so we got be okay with being different. Focus on what matters, the bigger picture.
Uh-huh.
What's the third subtlety?
The third one is about choosing your struggles and then finding meaning in them.
That's
like,
true.
you don't want to waste your fucks on things that aren't actually going to help you
Those
grow.
things that don't contribute, yeah.
Right.
Okay, so channel that energy towards something that, fuels you rather than drains you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like that.
And sometimes that means, you got to face some hard truths.
Yeah.
Remember? He talks about disappointment panda.
Oh, yes. Disappointment panic.
Yeah.
Like that superhero
Yeah.
who tells you what you need to hear, even if it's not what you want to hear.
Exactly. And those, like, tough moments,
Yeah.
those disappointments, they can be the things that help you grow the most.
Yeah, they force you to, like, reassess things,
Yeah, totally.
So, okay, we gotta be okay with being different. Focus on what really matters. Face the hard truths. And then he throws this curveball. You are not special. That's a tough one. What's he getting at there?
He's not trying to be mean or anything. I think it's more about kind of challenging the sense of entitlement that we have in our society. We're brought up to believe we're all, like, exceptional, destined for greatness.
Yeah.
And then it, sets us up for disappointment.
We're constantly bombarded with these stories of, like, extraordinary people doing these, like, amazing things. And it makes you feel like if you're not, you know, crushing it every single day, then you're somehow falling behind.
Totally. And he uses the story of Jimmy, the startup founder,
Yeah.
to kind of illustrate that point. He's so caught up in his own hype that he doesn't even realize how entitled he's become.
Living in a fantasy land?
Yeah, where success is like
a given, and failure doesn't exist.
Right, right.
And that kind of thinking, that leads to unhappiness.
Absolutely.
When we feel like we're entitled to certain outcomes,
Yeah.
We're just setting ourselves up for, like, constant disappointment.
Yeah, because reality rarely matches up to those expectations. And Manson, he actually shares this story about a time when he was in middle school and the principal searched his locker, thinking that he had drugs.
Wow, that's intense.
I know, right? And it turned out it wasn't true.
Yeah.
But it really made him think about how these early experiences can really shape how we see ourselves.
That sense of entitlement, yeah.
Exactly. And then later on, he talks about how his own struggles with entitlement really messed up his relationships.
Oh, yeah.
It led to all these unhealthy patterns.
Because he was kind of chasing validation all the time.
Exactly, trying to overcompensate.
So how do we break free from that, this entitlement trap?
Right.
If we're not special,
Yeah.
then what is our self-worth based on?
That's a great question. And it's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Because Manson, he tells this amazing story about Hiru Onoda, this Japanese soldier who kept fighting World War II for 30 years after it ended.
Wait, 30 years? How is that even possible?
I know, right? He was literally hiding out in the jungle, still thinking the war was going on. And in Onoda's story, it perfectly shows kind of the power of values, even when those values are, not serving you anymore.
So even though the war was over, he was still holding on to this belief system?
Yes, exactly.
That wasn't relevant anymore.
Totally. And this is Manson's big point. Choosing the wrong values leads to the wrong problems. Because values are like the why behind everything you do, right?
Yeah.
And if your values are messed up,
Yeah.
your whole experience of the world is going to be off.
Okay, I'm seeing the connection here. So if we're not special and we're prone to kind of clinging to these wrong values, how do we even figure out, like, what values actually matter?
Well, think about it. Your relationship with your brother, you mentioned earlier. You feel like you're failing because you're not as close as you want to be.
Yeah, it's something I've been kind of wrestling with for a while.
But what if
Yeah.
the way you're measuring that relationship is just wrong? Instead of focusing on how often you talk, maybe the metric should be the quality of the interactions you have.
Yeah.
Or, the mutual respect you have for each other.
That's a really good point. I've been so focused on this idea of what a good relationship with my brother should look like that I haven't really appreciated the good things that are there.
And that's Manson's point about metrics. They're the way we measure our progress towards those values. But if you choose the wrong metric, you end up feeling terrible, even if you're actually doing okay.
It's like setting yourself up to fail before you even begin.
Exactly.
So how do we choose the right metrics?
Well, it starts with choosing the right values.
Okay, but how do we know which values are the right ones?
That's the tricky part, right? There's no, magic formula.
Yeah.
But Manson uses these examples of two musicians, Dave Mustaine from Megadeth and Pete Best, the original drummer for the Beatles.
Okay, I know those names.
So Mustaine, he was kicked out of Metallica early on.
Yeah.
And even though he went on to have this huge, successful career, he still felt like a failure because he was always comparing himself to Metallica.
Wow. So even with all that success, he was still measuring himself against the wrong yardstick.
Exactly.
Right? It made him miserable.
Right. He was measuring his success based on, external validation, comparison to others, which just led to resentment. Best, on the other hand, he was fired from the Beatles right before they, blew up.
Oh, man, that's gotta hurt.
Right. But he eventually realized that family and a simple life were more important to him than fame.
Yeah.
So he found fulfillment by choosing different values. And he was able to be content, even though he missed out on, global stardom.
So it's like Mustaine was chasing external validation.
Yeah.
And Best found it in his own values.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And that's a key difference Manson talks about. Choosing values that are aligned with, who you actually are.
Not what other people expect you to be.
Right, exactly. That's what leads to real satisfaction.
Okay, so we've got choose our values and metrics carefully, let go of entitlement, be okay with our imperfections. It's a lot.
It is. It is.
But it seems like Manson, he doesn't stop there.
No, he doesn't.
He goes on to talk about this whole idea of the responsibility fault fallacy.
Yes, the responsibility fault fallacy.
And he tells the story about William James, the father of American psychology, right? And how James overcame all these, health problems, depression, by taking responsibility for his life. Oh, wait, so he took responsibility for being sick?
Well, not exactly. It's about understanding. The difference between responsibility and fault. Just because something isn't your fault doesn't mean you're not responsible for how you respond to it.
Okay.
You see what I mean?
So, like, if you get laid off from your job, it might not be your fault,
right?
But you're still responsible for figuring out your next steps.
Yes. It's about focusing on what you can control instead of dwelling on what you can't.
Okay.
He uses this example of getting hit by a car. Even if it's the other driver's fault, you're still responsible for taking care of yourself.
Yeah, dealing with the consequences, taking ownership of the situation, even when it sucks.
Right. And then he contrasts that with this example of a guy who blames women for not liking him because he's short.
Oh, wow.
So instead of taking responsibility for his own dating life,
right,
working on the things he can actually control.
He's just playing the victim card.
Exactly, yeah.
So he's stuck.
Yeah, he's stuck.
Because he's refusing to see his own role in it.
Totally.
And I think that's a trap that we can all fall into. It's so much easier to blame other people or circumstances than to look in the mirror and be like, okay, what can I change?
It is.
So taking responsibility is really about empowerment then.
I think so, yeah.
It's about shifting our focus from what's happening to us to how we choose to respond.
Yeah,
It's about writing our own story.
Yeah, even when things are tough.
Okay, I'm with you on that.
And then Manson, he gets really personal. He shares this story about his first girlfriend cheating on him.
Ooh, that's got to be rough.
It was a painful experience. But he realized that blaming her for his feelings wasn't actually helping him.
Right, is keeping him stuck.
Exactly.
So even though it wasn't his fault,
yeah,
by taking responsibility for his own emotions, he was able to learn and move on.
Exactly.
That's pretty powerful.
It is. It is.
So we can't control what other people do, but we can control how we react.
Absolutely.
And sometimes the most empowering thing is to react with, understanding and compassion.
Yeah, even when we've been hurt.
Wow, okay. So we're not special. We need to choose our values carefully, take responsibility for our own lives. That's a lot to digest.
It is.
Where do we go from here?
Well, that's where the real work begins, right? It's one thing to kind of understand these ideas, but it's another thing to actually live them. And that's what Manson gets into in the next part. It's about learning to be wrong.
Okay, now that sounds a little counterintuitive. I mean, aren't we always told to be right? To find the right answers?
Right, exactly.
How can being wrong be a good thing?
It's about recognizing that, We don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Our brains are wired to, find patterns, even when there aren't any.
So we're always trying to make sense of the world, even if it means making stuff up to fill in the gaps.
Right. He talks about this experiment where people are told to press buttons to make a light flash. And they start coming up with all these theories about which buttons to press and when. But the truth is, the light's just flashing randomly.
So it's like we're trying to solve a puzzle that doesn't even have a solution.
Exactly.
Do you ever find yourself doing that?
Oh, all the time.
Like overthinking things?
Yeah.
Looking for a deeper meaning?
Yeah, it's like our brains just want to understand, why things happen.
Right.
They want to find a reason for everything.
Right.
But sometimes there is no reason.
And being okay with that can be kind of freeing.
I think so, yeah.
So this need to make meaning out of everything, it can lead us down some dangerous paths, huh?
It can.
Like with that story of Meredith.
Oh, yeah.
The journalist who falsely accused her father of abuse.
That was a tough one.
Really powerful example of, how our memories can be so unreliable and how we can convince ourselves of things that aren't even true.
Absolutely. Especially when strong emotions are involved. It's like our feelings can cloud our judgment. And then we start creating these narratives that might not be accurate.
And Manson, he brings up this thing called Manson's law of avoidance.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
Right. Something about how The more a belief threatens who we think we are, the more we avoid questioning it.
Exactly. It's like,
Yeah.
we'd rather hold on to a comfortable lie
Yeah.
than face an uncomfortable truth.
Yeah, and the more invested we are in that belief, the harder it is to let go.
Totally.
Even when the evidence says we should. Like that example he gives of his friend's brother, who refuses to accept his sister's engagement.
Oh, right.
He's convinced the guy's wrong for her, but it seems like it's more about the brother's own discomfort with change.
It's easier to demonize the fiancé than to deal with his own stuff and that kind of avoidance. It keeps us stuck.
In our own heads, unable to see things clearly. So if we're constantly telling ourselves these stories, even if they're not true, how do we break free from that?
Well, Manson says we need to kill ourselves. Metaphorically speaking, of course.
Okay, that sounds a little intense.
I know, right?
What does that even mean?
It's about letting go of the stories we tell ourselves about who we are.
So, like, questioning our assumptions? Being open to different perspectives? Admitting when we're wrong?
Exactly.
That can be scary.
Oh, it can be, definitely. But it's also really liberating. You know, if you're clinging to this old, inaccurate view of yourself, you're not really living authentically.
You're living a lie.
Yeah, basically.
And that keeps us from growing, right?
Exactly. It keeps us from becoming who we're meant to be.
So learning to be wrong is about accepting that. We're all works in progress. And having the humility to admit when we've messed up. And the courage to change course.
Exactly.
So we're constantly shedding old versions of ourselves to make room for growth.
I like that,
And this whole idea of being willing to be wrong, it leads right into Manson's next point about the importance of failure.
Oh, yeah.
He says that failure isn't the opposite of success, but a part of the process.
The necessary part.
Okay, we're really challenging conventional wisdom here.
We are.
Tell me more about this failure as part of the process.
Well, he tells this great story about Picasso.
Oh, yeah, the painter.
Yes, I know Picasso.
Okay, so picture this. Picasso's an old man now, and he's sitting in a cafe, just doodling on a napkin. And this woman recognizes him. And she offers to buy the napkin, thinking she's getting this amazing deal. Because it only took him, a few minutes to draw it. And Picasso, he says to her, "No, ma'am, it took me over 60 years to draw this."
Wow.
What he's saying is that mastery comes from years of practice, trial and error, all those little failures along the way.
Well, you got to break a few eggs.
To make an omelet, right?
Exactly. And Manson calls this the failure-success paradox.
Okay.
Because we're so afraid of failing.
Yeah.
That we often don't even try.
Which means we never succeed.
Right.
So our fear of failure becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It does.
We avoid taking risks because we don't want to mess up. And then we end up limiting our own potential.
Exactly.
So we're stuck in this cycle of inaction and self-doubt.
Yeah.
But if we can change our perspective and start seeing failure as
like a necessary part of the journey,
then we can break free.
Exactly.
Okay, but how do we actually do that?
Well, Manson says we need to focus on process-oriented values rather than outcome-based ones.
Okay.
Remember we were talking about metrics before?
Yeah.
Instead of measuring our worth based on, external achievements, we can focus on the effort we put in, the lessons we learn.
Or growth along the way.
Exactly.
So it's about enjoying the journey, not just the destination.
Totally.
I like that.
And it goes back to choosing the right values. If we value things like learning and growth and resilience, then failure just becomes a part of that.
Yeah.
It's feedback. That helps us improve.
It takes the pressure off.
It does.
Of having to be perfect all the time.
Yeah.
I'm still struggling with this, to be honest.
I think we all do.
It's easy to get caught up in the fear of judgment.
Oh, yeah.
The pressure to succeed.
Absolutely.
Never struggle with that.
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
It's human nature to want to be liked, to avoid rejection. Manson actually shares this story about how he spent years traveling the world because he was afraid of commitment.
Interesting.
He was running away from responsibility, from the possibility of failure.
And he ties that experience to the importance of saying no.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And this is where it gets really interesting from a cultural perspective.
Yeah.
Because he talks about his time in Russia, where people are much more direct in their communication.
Oh, interesting.
It's not considered rude to tell someone you disagree or, decline an invitation.
So no beating around the bush.
No, none at all.
Just straight to the point.
Yes. And Manson argues that this actually leads to stronger relationships.
Because it's honest, right?
Yeah, it's all about authenticity. When people are upfront about their feelings, there's less room for misunderstandings.
I can see that, but I bet it can be like kind of jarring for people who aren't used to it.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
But his point is that our fear of rejection, this need to please everyone, it can actually keep us from living a more fulfilling life because we're so worried about what other people are going to think.
Yeah.
That we don't set boundaries. We don't pursue our passions.
We don't build real connections.
Exactly.
And he contrasts this with, the Russian culture, where saying no is actually a sign of respect.
Yes. It shows respect for yourself and the other person.
Because you're honoring your own needs.
Exactly.
And not feeling obligated
Right.
to say yes to everything.
Totally.
So how does this all tie back to failure?
Well, every time we say no to something, we're kind of failing to meet someone else's expectations.
Yeah. But we're choosing our own needs.
Yes.
Our own values.
Exactly.
And that's part of growth, right?
Absolutely.
It's about accepting that. We can't please everyone.
Right.
And sometimes saying no is the most loving thing we can do for ourselves and for the other person.
It's about setting those healthy boundaries, creating space for what really matters.
Yeah.
And Manson, he even tackles this idea of, Romeo and Juliet and how their relationship was actually pretty messed up.
Wait, Romeo and Juliet, the ultimate love story?
I know, right?
I mean.
Well, they're both so caught up in their own drama and their family's feuds that they made all these impulsive choices. That ended tragically.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a classic example of what happens when we let our emotions completely rule our decisions.
So it's a cautionary tale.
It is.
About, passion and intensity.
Yes.
Without boundaries.
Exactly. Yeah. And Manson argues that true love, it's not about those grand gestures or sacrificing yourself for someone else. Yep. It's about mutual respect, healthy boundaries, and honesty.
Honesty, even when it's hard.
Even when it's hard.
So it's about loving someone in a way that supports their
growth and well-being.
Not in a way that's like codependent or self-destructive.
Exactly. And this leads us to, the ultimate rejection.
Yeah.
Death.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Manson. He doesn't shy away from this topic. In fact, he starts the chapter with a story about a friend of his who died really young. And it was a tragic loss. And it made him really confront his own mortality. And it made him rethink his priorities.
But it's a good reminder that our time is limited,
Yeah.
And we have to make the most of it.
He introduces this concept of death terror.
Death terror.
Yeah, it's from the psychologist Ernest Becker.
Okay.
And Becker said that. Our fear of death, it's one of the main things that motivates us. It drives us to find meaning.
But we often end up chasing the wrong things, right?
Right. We cling to superficial values, achievements, trying to feel important, like we're leaving a legacy.
To avoid facing the fact that we're all going to die someday.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is where Manson brings it all together.
Okay.
He says that by accepting death, by acknowledging that we're not going to live forever, we can actually free ourselves.
From that fear.
Yes. From that fear-driven pursuit of meaning. And we can start living more authentically. Choosing values that actually matter to us. And focusing on what brings us joy right now.
In the present moment.
In the present moment.
It's about embracing the present.
Yeah.
Knowing that. It's really all we have.
Yeah, it's like that line from Fight Club. On a long enough timeline, the survival rate for everyone drops to 0.
Ooh, yeah.
I know, right? It's a sobering thought, but it's also kind of liberating.
Yeah, when we let go of this idea that we're going to live forever, we can start appreciating the beauty of life.
The fragility of it.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to pause for now.
Okay.
We've covered so much ground, from learning to be wrong to embracing failure.
To facing our own mortality.
It's a lot to take in.
It is.
So I'm curious, what's resonating with you the most so far?
Wow, that last part, that was heavy. Facing our own mortality. It's not exactly, something you chat about over coffee.
No, not really.
But I think Manson's right. There is something freeing about it. Makes you think about, what am I actually doing with my life? What about you? Has this whole deep dive, has it changed your perspective at all?
Definitely. It's like he's holding up this mirror.
Yeah.
making us look at our lives,
Yeah.
and asking ourselves, am I chasing stuff that doesn't even matter?
The superficial stuff.
Yeah, or am I putting my energy into things that actually make me feel fulfilled?
Yeah, it's like he's saying, you only get so many fucks to give.
Oh, right.
Make them count.
Exactly.
Which is kind of empowering when you think about it.
It is. It puts you in control.
You get to decide what matters to you.
Yeah.
What values you want to live by. It's not about keeping up with the Joneses,
No, it's not about meeting someone else's expectations.
It's about defining your own path.
Exactly.
And it's okay if that path looks different from everyone else's.
Oh, absolutely.
In fact, that's kind of the whole point, isn't it?
It is. Manson's all about embracing our individuality, our quirks.
The messy stuff.
Yeah, the messy stuff. There's no one right way to live.
What works for one person might not work for another.
Exactly.
So it's not about following a set of rules or trying to be this perfect ideal.
Right.
It's about figuring out what makes you,
What makes you tick?
yeah, what lights you up.
What brings you joy?
What makes you feel alive.
And that's a process, right?
It is. It's ongoing.
Our values change.
Yeah?
Our priorities shift. What mattered to us, 10 years ago might not be so important today.
Exactly.
And that's okay.
It's all part of the journey.
This lifelong journey of self-discovery, I guess you could call it.
Yeah, constantly learning and growing and figuring things out.
And it's messy. It is.
Are there going to be setbacks? Oh, yeah. Failures.
We're going to make mistakes.
We're going to screw up.
We're going to get things wrong.
But that's all part of it.
It is.
It's all part of the process.
And each time we stumble, it's a chance to learn, to grow.
To get a little bit wiser.
Right. Remember what Manson said about learning to be wrong.
Yeah.
It's about being open to new information, questioning what we think we know.
Having the humility to admit when we've messed up.
And that's where real growth happens.
It's about letting go of this need to be right all the time.
Yeah.
And embracing the uncertainty.
Embracing the journey.
And you don't have to have it all figured out. Right now,
Sure.
It's okay to take it one day at a time.
One step at a time.
To experiment, to explore.
To see what works for you.
And remember that whole idea of taking responsibility?
Oh, yeah.
It applies here too.
It does. You're in charge of your own life.
Your own choices.
Your own happiness.
No one else can do that for you. You get to decide what values you want to live by, what goals you want to pursue, what kind of person you want to be.
It's a pretty powerful realization.
It is.
And it can be overwhelming.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
But Manson reminds us we don't have to do it all at once.
We don't have to be perfect.
No. It's about small steps.
Gradual change.
Building momentum over time.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the subtle art of not giving a fuck, what are some key takeaways? What do you want listeners to walk away with?
I think the most important thing is life is short. We need to make the most of it. That doesn't mean we should be reckless,
Right.
But it does mean we should be intentional.
About how we spend our time.
Yeah, our energy.
It's about choosing to focus on the things that really matter.
The things that bring us joy.
Fulfillment.
The things that make us feel alive.
And letting go of the things that don't.
The things that drain us.
Things that keep us stuck.
In negativity and fear.
It's about embracing our imperfections.
Learning from our failures.
Saying no to the things that don't align with our values.
Ultimately.
Yeah.
Creating a life that's meaningful, authentic. A life that reflects who we truly are.
I love that. Well said. So to everyone listening, I hope this deep dive has given you some things to think about, some new perspectives, maybe even a little inspiration to create a life that you love.
Thanks for joining us. It's been great exploring these ideas with you.
And remember, you don't have to have it all figured out today. Just keep asking yourself the important questions, keep challenging yourself to grow, and keep choosing to give a fuck about the things that truly matter. Until next time, keep exploring and keep living a life that is true to you.